spirit of the prophet Samuel. Saul wanted to know how to defeat the Philistines, the people from the southern coasts of Canaan, who often warred with the Israelites in battle the following day. The woman Saul sought out is described in the Hebrew text as Eset Balat Ov, or a female master of the Ov, which refers to a ghost pit, a hole dug into the ground as part of ceremonies for raising the dead. Saul must have been desperate, as such rituals common in the pre-Israelite Canaanite culture were now strictly forbidden. Reluctantly, the woman performed the ritual, and Elohim, or spirits, arose from the pit in the village of Endor. Among the spirits was the prophet Samuel, as an old man wearing a robe, who warned Saul that he had lost God's trust and that he and his sons would die at the hands of the Philistines. As prophesied, Saul's son perished in battle, and he chose to die by suicide rather than be captured. Over the centuries, this brief story has inspired much theological debate. At first, this centered on whether the apparition really was Samuel's spirit, and why he would rise up through the ground, which for Christians had a strong association with hell. However, by the time of the European witch trials, attention had turned to the woman, who was widely cited as providing biblical evidence for the existence of witches. In later translations of the Bible, she became known as the Witch of Endor. This 1753 painting by Janurius Zick portrays the woman of Endor in the image of a hag or witch with the robed spirit of Samuel behind her. I see a ghostly figure coming out of the earth. Friend or foe? Trickster spirits. Almost every region of the world has its trickster spirits. These figures play an ambiguous role. They are able to break the rules, but their deceit often protects the common people against higher powers. In children's stories, they help to teach young people about social norms, and even when their tricks fall flat and they themselves are tricked, their experiences can create a feeling of communal solidarity by showing that a certain amount of misfortune is an inevitable part of life. A state of in-between. Many tricksters are beings who live between realms or have dual natures. Loki, the Norse god, was the son of a giantess and so only half divine. His tricks included causing the death of the god Balder with an arrow made of mistletoe. Positioned in between, tricksters are often associated with thresholds. For example, the West African Yoruba figure Esu, usually presented as a trickster orisa or spirit, is associated with many transitional symbols, including crossroads, gates, keys, and doors. Esu uses the power of divination as a means of answering difficult questions, just as many tricksters use pranks to resolve apparently impossible situations. These situations may include oppression by outsiders, as dealt with by Brer Rabbit in the stories that were told among enslaved people in the American South, which show how wit and humour can help to overcome adversity. Shape-shifting teachers. Tricksters often have the ability to change shape or are themselves part animal. Sun Wukong, the Chinese Monkey King, made himself immortal by erasing his name from the Book of Life, and with typical trickster mischief is not above turning up drunk to the gods' banquets and stealing their food. In North American tales, tricksters can take the shape of a bird, such as a Wizaketchak, the crane spirit of the Algonquin people, or a land animal such as the coyote of the indigenous peoples of the Great Plains and American Southwest. Coyotes' useful exploits include leading people from the underworld to Earth and creating the first horse, but always with the initial intention to deceive. Some tricksters take human forms, such as the Polynesian hero Maui, who is revered for pulling the Hawaiian Islands up from the ocean floor by his fishing hook. Whatever form they take, tricksters illustrate how the way of the world does not always play by the rules, and that sometimes it can be necessary to break them. Kitsune. Kitsune are Japanese fox spirits endowed with supernatural trickster abilities. They are the messengers of Inari, the rice goddess of worldly success, and their powers and the number of tails they have grow with age. A nine-tailed kitsune is said to be almost invincible and able to see and hear all things in the world. These untrustworthy spirits often create illusions, such as a second moon, to lead travellers astray. It is said that a kitsune can be controlled by seizing the magical pearl in which it hides its soul. Kitsune masks are commonly worn during rice harvest festivals in Japan. Shifting trickster Esu takes many forms, from old man to young child, and in this late 19th century wooden carving is depicted as female. Esu's exploits illustrate that there are two sides to every situation. More for you. In this illustration from Joel Chandler Harris's 1892 version of the folktale, Brer Rabbit has fooled Brer Bear into tying himself up in a trickster role reversal. Family matters. Ancestor veneration in Asia. Originating in Neolithic times, the veneration of ancestors plays a vital role in religious belief across much of East and Southeast Asia. The practice combines a generalized respect for the elders in society with a sense that this must be carried on into the afterlife, where ancestral spirits require regular offerings to sustain and appease them. Divining ancestor needs. Respect for the ancestors appears in varying forms across all the region's main religious traditions, including Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Shinto, and animist and indigenous belief systems. In China, ancestor veneration dates back to at least 5000 BCE, and the Yangshao culture of the Middle Yellow River Valley by the Shang dynasty. Divination using oracle bones, tortoise shells, or ox bones that were heated to produce cracks that could be interpreted, prescribed regular sacrifices to appease the spirits of ancestors. By the time of the Zhou dynasty, ancestor worship had become more elaborate, with temples dedicated to the spirits of former emperors. Split souls. As well as the cults of imperial ancestors, the ancient Chinese revered members of their own families, worshipping them at home and in frequent rituals at their tombs. They believed that a person has two soul elements, the Hun and the Po. The Hun was destined for the afterlife. It was first assessed by the city god and then judged by the 10 magistrates of hell. If virtuous, it could choose either to cross a golden bridge to nirvana and eternal bliss, or a silver bridge to the land of the gods. Those who had transgressed in life, such as by disrespecting their parents, were thought to suffer a period of punishment before being permitted to cross one of the bridges. The Po stayed with the physical body and required regular nourishment in the form of offerings of food and spirit money. In some traditions, a third spiritual element was said to reside in or near the wooden ancestral tablets that formed a key part of ancestor veneration. Ritual vessel. Bulbous-based bronze-hue wine vessels were placed in Chinese tombs as offerings or used in ceremonies to honour the dead. This Western Zhou example, with a bird-shaped lid and stylised tuti demon head decoration, is from the 8th century BCE. Ancestral lineup. This Chinese portrait from the early 19th century shows 6 generations of ancestors, with the most recently dead occupying the front row. The altar at the back of the room contains offerings and an ancestral tablet. Ancestors in the Analects. Although his writing ushered in a new code of ethics and morality in China, the 5th century BCE Chinese philosopher Confucius did not reject traditional ancestor worship. In the writings collected after his death, earth as the Analects, who recommended the detailed rituals necessary for the veneration of ancestors, such as fasting, the wearing of ceremonial dress, and the offering of food. Confucius regarded these practices as a form of filial piety, which continued the respect due to elders in life after death. Hungry ghosts. Making regular offerings was especially important during the lunar month of July, when ghosts were believed to return to the land of the living. Festivals, such as the Buddhist Alambana and the Taoist Zhongyuan, are still held in China to remember and appease these spirits. People who committed evil acts in life, died by suicide, died violently, or whose families did not make offerings might be punished by becoming hungry ghosts. These restless spirits wandered the earth, inflicting vengeance on those who had wronged them. They could only be put to rest by rituals and sacrifices. Spirit protection. In Korea, ancestor veneration may have originally occurred at prehistoric megalithic dolmens. It was formalized around the imperial family during the Joseon dynasty, when shrines were constructed for the worship of the ancestral ruler Jongmyo, with sacrifices made at elaborate altars such as Sajiktan in Seoul. Many Koreans believed that a dead person's soul had three spirits. The Hon was said to rise to heaven, while the Baek was buried in the tomb. There it remained for 4 generations before ascending to heaven to become a spiritual protector to the person's descendants. The Baek and a third spirit, which resided in the ancestral tablets on the family altar, needed to be honoured with regular offerings. This third spirit had a special box constructed for it to prevent it from wandering, and was also given spirit money, which it could ultimately use to pay for passage at the 12 gates of the underworld. For those who had died through violence or accidents, the services of shamans were called upon to cleanse the spirit of its anger and allow it to pass through to the next world. Paying respects. This 19th century Japanese woodblock depicts men dressed in traditional kimonos, making offerings of food and flowers to the kami and the spirits of their dead ancestors. Nature spirits and restless souls. In Japan's Shinto religion, there is a distinction between the human dead and the kami, spirits that inhabit natural features such as rocks, trees, and streams. The kami are venerated mainly at Shinto shrines, while the human ancestors are revered at domestic altars, in visits to family graves, and at festivals such as Bon in July and August. People make offerings of food, drink, and symbolic money to nourish and appease the dead, both the peaceful dead who are thought to protect the living and the restless dead, those who lived an unhappy life or experienced an unnatural death. These tragic spirits wander the world, struggling to enter the afterlife. Only veneration by the living can help them to escape this fate. In one version of Shinto, the Sangaku mountain cult, human spirits are believed to live among the kami. After 13 years, they too become kami, further blurring the distinction between the two types of spirit. The sleeping dead. In Southeast Asia, customs are similarly focused on venerating the ancestors. In the Philippines, feasts were traditionally held for departed ancestors. The ancestors were believed to share the afterlife with non-human spirits, so might, if properly honoured, be able to intervene and prevent these beings from harming their descendants. In Tanah Toraja, on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, people have long had an intimate relationship with their ancestors, keeping their departed loved ones in their home for years before the funeral. Until they are buried, the deceased are referred to as simply sleeping. The funerals are hugely elaborate 11-day events, which end with the final interment of the body in a cliff-face tomb. of honouring the dead and stressing the links between the elders who have gone before and the living, whose duty it is to revere the ancestors and perpetuate tradition. This set of grandfather bones was buried under a house in the Philippines. In many Filipino traditions, bodies may be exhumed and reburied several times, often to appease or quieten the ancestor spirits. In Korea's later Joseon dynasty, paintings sometimes replaced ancestor shrines as a focus of devotion. This 1811 example commemorates a former king and queen and may have been hung where government workers could pay homage. To forget one's ancestors is to be a brook without a source, a tree without a root. Chinese proverb. Venerating the dead. One of human history's oldest beliefs is that when family members die, they enter a spirit world that is closer to the gods than to the living. Ancestor spirits are therefore believed to be able to offer protection and assistance to their descendants, so long as they are venerated with dutiful offerings and prayers. Many cultures have also produced fetishistic objects to affirm this connection between the ancestors and the living, and these are believed to be imbued with supernatural powers. This Tavu ancestral altar is from the Indonesian Tanimbar Islands, often adorned with heirlooms and bones. The Tavu is a point of contact between the living and the dead. Chinese oracle bones were inscribed with questions to the ancestors, then heated to produce cracks or answers. Ancestor skulls such as this one are preserved and decorated by the Asmet people of Papua New Guinea to channel their spirits to their clan. This Maori Amo house post figure dates from circa 1800. It once adorned a meeting house where it represented the spirit of an ancestor. And this one, Mabulu Ngulu. Images of the dead, such as this 19th century one, were placed on reliquaries housing ancestors' bones by the Kota of Gabon. Zapotec funerary urns, such as this 6th century CE example from the Monte Alban, Mexico, were visited by descendants who brought offerings of incense, chocolate, and blood. This jade funerary mask and collar from the Maya site of Calakmul date to 600 to 900 CE. Masks such as this one depicted the dead and established a link with the spirit world. Medieval bust reliquaries held the skulls of Christian saints, in this case Saint Balbina, and were placed on or near altars or carried in processions on feast days. Alo sculptures marked the tombs of the Antandroy, Mahafale and Sakalava people of Madagascar. The word alo means intermediary between the living and the dead. This house model comes from the Mesoamerican Nayarit culture. Placed in a tomb, it depicted the thin divide between the living and the dead. Eyes everywhere. Spirits in Northern European folklore. Relatively little is understood about the ancient religions of Northern Europe, as accounts of pagan beliefs by later Christian writers often distorted or misunderstood what they heard. Much of what is known survived in the form of folk customs and stories passed down orally from one generation to the next across a vast landscape that once stretched from the steppes of Asia to the Atlantic. The Smith and the Devil is one such story, taking much the same form throughout the Indo-European speaking world. It describes how a metalworker makes a bargain with the devil or other demonic being that allows the man to weld any materials together. When the devil comes to collect the man's soul a decade later, the man welds him to a tree, and the devil is forced to release the metalworker from his side of the bargain. Worship of the gods in forest groves and clearings was a common feature of pre-Christian European religions, especially in Scandinavia and northern Germany, where the Saxons venerated the Irminsul. This sacred pole was destroyed when the Frankish ruler Charlemagne massacred Saxon pagans in the late 18th century CE. Lost souls and demonic dogs. In Scandinavia and elsewhere in the Germanic and Celtic world, the dead were buried in mounds. The rich were laid to rest with sumptuous grave goods, but even the poor were buried with a pot or two to serve them in the afterlife. Beliefs about where the deceased ended up varied, however. The Norse dead were believed to go to the various halls of the gods, some of which were forbidding places. For example, Nastrond, the corpse shore in Hell's Domain, where murderers were sent. But there was also a belief that the dead person's spirit, their soul or soul, remained close to the place of burial for a while, particularly if the deceased still had business, such as righting a wrong in the land of the living. Ghosts and other apparitions stalked the landscape in many guises. In the folklore of Brittany, France, the Eanic Anod, Little John of the Shore, were the lost souls of those drowned at sea. They swam close to the shore, crying out pitifully, but only attacked those who addressed them directly. More frightening was the wild hunt, which flew across the night sky with its pack of demonic dogs. Other ghostly hounds, black dogs known in England as barghists or shugs for their shaggy appearance, howled near houses where someone was doomed to die. Living landscape. Some supernatural beings were closely associated with features of the landscape. Forests and hills were thought to be the domain of the goblins. Elves and sprites, small, shy and mischievous creatures similar to fairies that largely avoided human company. Remote wastelands were said to be populated by trolls, depicted as large, ungainly and ugly, with greenish-blue skin, dressed in skins and wielding clubs. Although violent to intruders, trolls were considered easy to trick. Gifts for the afterlife, inlaid with gold and garnets. This purse lid was just one of the precious grave goods buried with a high-status male, possibly a king, in a 7th century Anglo-Saxon burial mound at Sutton Hoo, Suffolk, England. Burial ritual. Germanic burial rites were designed to help the soul to leave the body. In this scene, the deceased has been given offerings, including a pot and a sword. Weapons were often found in male graves for use in the afterlife. Demon dog. This woodcut of the English Civil War Battle of Marston Moor in 1644 shows the killing of Boy, Prince Rupert's dog, which was said to have magical powers such as shapeshifting. Boy was actually a white dog. This depiction plays on the European folkloric tradition of huge demonic black dogs, such as barghists, associated with death and ill omens. Watery places teemed with spirits in Germanic folklore. In marshlands, the will-o'-the-wisp or jack-o'-lantern, which appeared as a dancing string of lights, led travellers deep into bogs, where they drowned and were devoured. In Scandinavia, the Fosgrim was a type of aquatic troll whose skill at playing the fiddle belied its hideous appearance. Although it could be appeased with offerings of meat and might even teach fortunate humans to play its instruments, this troll's haunting airs were also said to lead its victims to a watery doom. Selkies, Kelpies and Kobolds. In Scottish folklore, the Selkies were seal folk who frolicked in the water but sometimes shed their skins to take human form. The Selkies' arch rivals were the Finn folk of Orkney, sea-dwelling sorcerers who kidnapped humans to live with them in their underwater homes. More dangerous still were the Kelpies, water horses made of foam that could also shapeshift into the form of beautiful women. Kelpies lured children into riding them, but would not allow their victims to dismount. Instead, they galloped into the water, drowning their helpless riders. Even the home was not immune from spirits. The Nis or Tomti in Scandinavian and the Kobold in Germany were considered to be guardians of the farm or homestead and were often associated with its first inhabitant. They supposedly carried out domestic chores, but were likely to play tricks on the homeowner if neglected. One type of Nis, the Tomtenis, is particularly associated with the winter solstice, and today Scandinavians still decorate their homes at Christmas with its likeness. Folklore rediscovered, from household spirits to hellhounds, trolls, and yet more ferocious beasts like dragons, such as Nidhogg, who gnaws at the roots of the world tree in Norse mythology. Supernatural beings formed the bedrock of the folk tales that authors such as German brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm and Danish writer Hans Christian Andersen rediscovered in the 19th century. By recording versions of these tales, many of which have ancient origins, these writers ensured that the spirits that inhabited the landscape of pre-Christian Europe are still part of the region's heritage today. Marshlights. German artist Hermann Heinrich's 1823 painting Will o' the Wisps and Snake forms part of his body of work that concentrates on the themes from Northern European mythology and folklore. Surprised by a Kelpie. The 1821 print Sees a Water Kelpie by the London cartoonist Thomas MacLean is a humorous depiction of a man being attacked by a Kelpie. This one has shapeshifted into the form of a monstrous fish with a lion-like face. Forest Troll. Norwegian artist Theodor Kittelsen's 1899 Skov-Trolled Forest Troll was one of a series of troll paintings he produced, capturing the menace of these dark creatures and their intimate connection to the ancient northern landscape. Druids, disguises and bonfires. The Celtic festival of Samhain. After the harvest, when summer turned to winter, the ancient Celts celebrated Samhain, a festival that lasted for 3 days and nights. It marked the end of the harvest and the approach of the hungry winter months, a time when death and the dead could visit the living. Danger in the dark. The Celts were a cultural grouping of distinct tribes who originated in Iron Age Europe and shared a culture and similar languages. What is known about Samhain comes from the traditions of the insular Celts of the British Isles and Brittany. At Samhain, communities celebrated the harvest with feasting and drinking in honour of the gods, whose blessing was sought to ensure good fortune prevailed. Failure to attend was believed to invite divine curses. Towering communal bonfires were lit from discarded crops, animals were slaughtered, and druid priests offered sacrifices to the gods, hence the original term bonfires. The embers of these fires were then used to light the hearth of every home, to bind the community together. The ashes of the fire were spread on the fields to bless the earth, and people also smeared ash over their faces to create a disguise that would protect them from evil spirits. At this time of year, roaming spirits and supernatural creatures were said to escape the other world, such as the shape-shifting puka, which blighted unharvested crops and kidnapped children, or Lady Gwyn, a headless woman with a black pig. Feeding the spirits. Using a disguise meant that people only had to reveal themselves to good spirits, who were believed to help divine the rituals were popular, such as roasting hazelnuts in a hearth fire, asking questions, and interpreting how the nuts behaved for answers. Exploding nuts did not bode well. Marriage divination was also performed by bobbing for apples. Families left food and drink outside their homes for ancestor spirits and laid places for them at their tables, known as a dumb supper. Paying respect was believed to appease the spirits and ensure survival through the hard winter. Modern Samhain. The British Isles experienced a Celtic revival in the 19th century, and renewed interest in the Druid faith led people to convert to neo-paganism. The often-cited concept of the veil between life and death being thinner at Samhain probably originated in this period. Today, many pagans honour Samhain with rituals, feasts and fires. Some celebrations are private, but others have become public spectacles, such as the annual Samhain Fire Festival in Holyrood Park, Scotland. A celebrant dressed as the Winter King carries a flaming sword at the 2017 Samhain celebration in Glastonbury, England. Divination spoon. Decorated with symbolic motifs, this copper Iron Age spoon was possibly used by Druids for divination. Many similar spoons have been excavated, suggesting they were ritualistically significant. Samhain was a religious event guided by Druids and was believed to protect the community from spiritual dangers and the oncoming winter. The people of the mounds, the Eeries. By around 500 BCE, Celtic peoples inhabited a swathe of land across northwestern Europe that encompassed Spain, France, Britain and Ireland. The Celts brought a rich system of beliefs and deities from their original homeland, possibly in Central Europe. While these beliefs varied from region to region, the Celts were united by a deep reverence for the land. They believed that the natural landscape was suffused with the divine, with particular places acting as gateways to the land of the gods. The other world of the gods and other supernatural beings came closest to the mortal realm in watery places such as springs, rivers, lakes and bogs, in caves and hills, and in groves of sacred trees, especially hawthorn, where Druids, the Celtic priests, carried out ceremonies. In Ireland, the River Shannon is named for the goddess Siona. But for the Irish Celts, the most common gateways to the other world were the burial mounds and Iron Age forts, which later Celts called fairy forts, that dotted the country. Fairy forts the Celts believed were home to the Eeries, or people of the mounds, also called the Eeries, and in Scotland the Eeries. They were considered to be the descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, an ancient race of supernatural beings who had lived in Ireland before the Milesians. The ancestors of the Celts forced them underground. Some Christian writers believed that the Eeries were fallen angels who had rebelled against God, while others believed them to be the souls of unbaptized dead humans. Dealing with the good people. Later writers used generic term fairies to refer to the Eeries, but the Irish Celts gave them a variety of names such as Naduna Maith, the good people, or Nadium Biega, the little people. God, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing these terribly. Designed to flatter the Eeries and avoid angering them. Although they were generally regarded as neither good nor evil, they could, if provoked, punish humans by spoiling their butter, making cow's milk dry up, or causing sickness. Those who caught sight of those normally invisible beings without permission might even be blinded. The Irish Celts sought to appease the Eeries, leaving gifts and aligning the front and back doors of cottages perfectly so that the good people could walk along their unseen fairy paths unhindered. Often depicted as tall, human-like beings with pointed ears dressed in forest hues of red and green, The AOC lived much like humans in their parallel world, drinking whiskey, dancing, and keeping cows. They had some peculiarities, though, such as their hatred of iron, fire, and salt, which the human Celts sometimes used as charms to keep the AOC at bay, and a particular love of white quartz. The queen was gone, and no man knew how, for the fairy folk they have cast their spell, and whither they bear her no man may tell. Animal art found near Tricktingen in Germany. This exquisite 2nd century BCE silver armband, decorated with bull head endings, is typical of Celtic craftsmanship and of a people who believed that the divine resided in everything, including animals, plants, hills, and rivers. Eternal youth. The Irish Celtic otherworld known as the Tenanog, or Land of the Ever Young, are seen here in the 1920s depiction of AOC in a thriving landscape by English illustrator Arthur Rackham. Riders of the She. John Duncan's 1911 painting shows the AOC out hunting. They carry symbols of their power, such as the Tree of Life and the Stone of Quietness, believed to reveal the past and future. In Celtic folklore, dealing with the AOC was fraught with peril. They might help with the harvest or ruin it, depending on their mood. Humans invited to enter the fairy mound might leave it to find years gone by and their loved ones dead. For others, such as the shepherd boy asked to join the Welsh equivalent of the AOC, the Dilwith Teg fair family, after meeting them in the woods, no time passes at all. One moment he is in a luxurious palace, wanting for nothing. The next, after drinking from a forbidden fountain in the other world, he finds himself back on the hillside with his sheep. Changelings. Another trick the Celts believed they had to guard against was the abduction of their children. The AOC would switch a healthy human baby for a sickly child of their own. This replacement child, or changeling, would feed voraciously, but would nonetheless gradually fade away and die. When this happened, the abducted human child would be trapped in the other world, doomed forever to be a servant of the fairy folk, alongside human midwives, who alone could assist at the birth of the AOC babies, and any others they deemed useful or simply wanted to ensnare. The Celts placed iron scissors in their cradles, hoping that the good folks' hatred of that metal would protect their babies from substitution by changelings. Malevolent beings. Other inhabitants of the Celtic otherworld were far more dangerous than the ASG. The Dig Dway was the ghost of a woman forced by her father into a loveless marriage that ended in her suicide. In revenge, her spirit sucked her husband's and father's blood dry, and her vampire-like phantasm was thought to stalk remote areas, feeding on the blood of unsuspecting young men. Only rocks piled on her grave could keep her quiet for a year. The Banshee, the apparition of a woman with long streaming hair, was said to travel the countryside in a cart drawn by 6 coal-black horses. Anyone who heard her unearthly scream 3 times was doomed to die soon after. Though the tradition might be an echo of keening, the practice where professional mourning women were paid to wail at funerals, fear of the Banshee's cry terrified generations of Celts. It was better, they believed, to stay away from bogs and remote moors, and not to stray too close to the fairy mounds. The good folk might be feasting there, and might offer a passing human their hospitality, but only the foolhardy would accept. Fairy darts and thunderbolts. Celtic peoples found prehistoric artifacts scattered around the ancient mounds in which they believed the Eeries lived. They concluded that these artifacts must have magical properties. Flint arrowheads, for example, were thought to be fairy darts shot by the Eeries, while polished stone axes were thunderbolts that had fallen to earth. Fairy darts were blamed for ailments such as paralysis, blindness, or sickness in cattle, but placed in water that was then drunk by the patient, the darts or thunderbolts could also be used as a cure. This thunderbolt-like Neolithic polished stone axe was with flattened sides, and a sharpened blade was excavated in Pendle, Lancashire, UK. Child swap. Joseph Bouvier's 19th century painting depicts a group of Eeries carrying away a human baby, having left a mischievous-looking changeling nestled in the vegetation on the ground. Deliverer of death. In this 19th century illustration, the spectral image of the banshee hovers over an Irish village, her hair streaming as she emits the scream believed to foretell the imminent death of a villager. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I hope you liked the story, my little Eeries. Thank you for listening. Come back for more scary stories.